was for the other 5 participants to be rendered completely incapacitated.
Wow.
No second place, no, good effort badge. Just one winner, defined solely by the physical collapse of all the others.
We are taking a serious plunge into a truly wild account.
Frankly, brutal competition. It's very much a set of very particular circumstances laid out.
Definitely the surprising details, and while the undeniable intensity that comes unlike any you've likely encountered before, where and when did this unique event actually take place?
Right. The material pinpoints the location pretty specifically. It was held at the house belonging to the individuals identified as Nuts and the narrator themselves.
Okay, their place.
Their place.
Yeah.
And the setting for this house, it was in Australia.
Right, Australia. And it wasn't described as some, big public thing or an organized event with promoters or anything like that.
No, not at all. As taking place at a private residence. It's very much within this specific sort of domestic context.
So not just a casual barbecue that got out of hand?
Definitely not. Planned competition among this particular group of people. It had a defined purpose for that day.
And who are these individuals, the ones actually, stepping up to this challenge?
According to the material, there were 6 participants in total. 6 people competing.
6? And their nationalities?
Yeah, that was split evenly. It was 3 individuals from Finland and 3 from Australia.
Ah, okay. So a mix.
A mix, yeah. Local and international competitors, just for this particular event described. These 6 were the ones actively, engaged in the challenge itself.
And beyond the competitors, there were also people overseeing it, like judges.
That's right.
Who were they?
That role, the same people whose house it was.
Ah, okay. So they weren't actually drinking in the competition.
No, not participating in this specific competition as described. But their role was crucial. They were the observers, the arbiters, you could say, the ones setting the stage and overseeing this whole intense event from start to finish. They had a specific job beyond just being there.
Makes sense. Now, there's a small personal detail the sources offer about one of the Finnish guys.
Yes, just a brief mention.
Oh.
The material notes that one of the Finnish individuals, who identified by name as Marty,
Okay.
he apparently had a wife and kids back home in Finland. It's, like I said, a brief mention, but it does serve to connect this individual, who, well, he becomes pretty significant later in the story.
Right.
Connects him to a life outside the context of this specific, very isolated event. It adds just a small human touch provided by the text itself.
Now, this is really important, I think. We need to be precise about the scope of the information here, based only on what the sources tell us. They're very specific that this event happened at an Australian residence, maybe a backyard, you mentioned.
Yeah, likely a backyard setting based on some descriptions later, like someone pissing in the garden, that kind of thing. But the sources are equally specific about what they are not describing.
Which is?
They make it explicitly clear that they're describing only this particular event, this one competition at this specific place on this specific day. They actually go out of their way to state they do not provide broader information about Australian drinking culture in general.
Okay, that's a key distinction.
It's crucial. We're given this really highly focused lens on one single incident and the behavior within that incident. And we have to respect the boundaries the sources themselves set about making wider generalizations. We learn about this competition, this one event, not about Australian culture as a whole, according to this material.
And what's fascinating about that point about scope is how the sources give us this almost claustrophobic focus. We're plunged right into this single event, these few people, this bizarre challenge, and there's no wider social commentary, no context beyond the immediate situation described. It feels very, very self-contained just based on how the sources present it.
And that self-containment, I think, makes the intensity of the rules they describe even more striking. Because these weren't, the rules of a casual pub game or some friendly challenge.
Not at all.
The sources describe a structure that was inherently designed for extremity.
Okay, here's where, as we promised, it gets really interesting. And, frankly, quite disturbing. The rules of this competition, as they're detailed in the sources, were just, far from standard.
That's right.
This wasn't about how fast you could drink a beer or who could neck the most while still standing up. The goal wasn't speed. It wasn't typical quantity. It was this really twisted form of elimination based on physical failure.
Yeah, the sources describe the core structure as a brutal challenge with a single winner. That's the phrase used. And the rule that enforced this brutality was stark, it was uncompromising, and, extreme.
How so?
One person had to win. And the only way that could happen was for the other 5 participants to be rendered completely incapacitated.
Wow.
No second place, no, good effort badge. Just one winner, defined solely by the physical collapse of all the others.
And incapacitated, the definition of that as laid out right there in the source material, it's very clear, isn't it?
Extremely clear. It says, unable to stand, walk, talk, or move.
Okay, no ambiguity.
None. If you could still manage any of those things, you were technically still in the game, no matter how awful you might have been feeling.
Right. So the implication, which the source directly states, is that participants drank till you drop.
Exactly, till you drop. This wasn't a race to some kind of finish line. It was a contest of just sheer physical, metabolic endurance.
Yeah.
And it only ended when competitors' bodies just completely gave out to the point of total incapacitation, as defined by those rules.
It was a competition where physical collapse was literally the way people were eliminated. Everyone except the winner.
Precisely.
And the judges, Nuts and the narrator, they weren't just watching passively.
No, they were actively involved in enforcing these, unique and pretty harsh rules. What really jumped out at me reading this part was the detail about vomiting.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that.
The source includes a specific rule about it. It says, and I'm quoting here, if you crawled off and vomited, that's okay, but you got to come back.
Okay, so vomiting itself didn't get you kicked out.
No, which is kind of wild when you think about it. Vomiting, usually a sign of, severe overconsumption, maybe even medical distress.
Right.
Wasn't an automatic disqualifier here. It was almost treated like a tactical move, a way to potentially keep going. But the crucial part was you had to return to the competition area to stay in the game. If you couldn't physically make it back, or if you just passed out somewhere and didn't respond, then you were officially out, according to these rules.
And the source even mentions a pretty crude, but I guess effective method Nuts used for checking if someone was truly out.
Yeah, it paints a really vivid picture. It says Nuts was there with a hose, just washing them down, squirting at them, and normally they just, passed out, gone.
Wow. Just hosing people down to see if they react. That's a stark image, especially in a backyard setting.
It certainly highlights the extreme nature of this event and the judge's very hands-on, almost brutal role in deciding who had actually reached that point of total incapacitation. If someone didn't react to being sprayed with cold water, they were deemed passed out, gone, out of the running.
And there's another significant line in there, isn't there, from the narrator looking back?
Yes, that's really important context. It's the narrator reflecting on their perspective at the time this was all happening. They state that they knew nothing about dying or drink death or over alcohol shit.
So they're admitting they didn't understand the risks.
That's what the source suggests, yeah. It provides crucial context for the mindset of the judges during the event. It implies, based on their own words, a profound lack of understanding right then of the severe, potentially legal dangers tied to this level of drinking. It kind of frames their actions within a context of, dangerous ignorance rather than deliberate malice, based purely on their own retrospective account in the source.
Okay, so given those rules where elimination means total incapacitation, you can just imagine things escalated pretty quickly as this competition wore on and people kept drinking.
Absolutely.
The source mentions competitors literally falling on the ground as the event progressed. And this wasn't like accidental tripping.
No, this was the physical consequence of the rules playing out. It was a process of attrition, pure and simple.
And the sources give some estimated drink counts towards the end.
Yeah, they do. They provide some pretty staggering estimated figures for the later stages, mentioning numbers like 65, 75, 80 at the end for drinks.
Wow, 65 to 80 drinks.
Now, they are presented as estimates, but still, these numbers, within the context of a competition specifically designed to reach incapacitation, they strongly suggest the sheer volume consumed by those who managed to last deep into this thing was substantial by any standard described in the text.
And as those numbers climbed and the hours presumably ticked by, people were indeed dropping out, reaching that state of being unable to stand, walk, talk, or move.
Yes. And the source uses this incredibly vivid and honestly slightly alarming phrase to describe the scene. It says, "Bodies are dead near us."
Bodies are dead near us.
But then it immediately clarifies, in parentheses, not dead, but passed out.
Okay. Phew, but still.
Still, it paints a grim picture of the scene right there around the competition area as competitors were eliminated by reaching that state of incapacitation defined by the rules. You have to imagine the scene. Multiple people just lying there, prone, unresponsive, while the last few competitors are still going.
It's a competition that was effectively this relentless process of physical breakdown, just narrowing the field down participant by participant.
Exactly. Each person reached their absolute physical limit and just couldn't continue according to the very strict, physically demanding rules of this specific challenge. And that visual described bodies lying nearby, it really emphasizes the stark outcome of this drink till you drop structure.
Okay, so amidst this grim grind of attrition, the source describes a specific, quite dramatic turn involving one of the participants we heard about earlier, Marty.
Yes. Marty, the Finnish guy, the one mentioned as having a family back home.
What happened with him?
According to the source, Marty behaved differently at a certain point.
Yeah.
He kind of went off from the main group of competitors, saying he was okay.
Went off where?
Inside the house. And this is contrasted in the source with the description of others who were apparently handling things differently outside, like pissing in the garden to drink a lot.
Right.
So Marty's action of leaving the immediate area and going inside the house seemed, well, unusual or maybe concerning to the judges, given the state of the competition.
So the judges, Nuts, and the narrator, they noticed this.
They clearly sensed something wasn't quite right about him just wandering off like that. The source actually captures their reaction. It says they thought, wait, hang on.
Like suspicion or concern?
Yeah, indicating suspicion or concern, or at least a feeling they needed to check on him. So they followed him inside the house to see what was up.
And what did they find?
Well, according to the narrative, they found immediate confirmation that he had reached the point of incapacitation, just not with the main group. The source describes finding Marty passed out the toilet floor like dead.
Like dead. There's that phrase again.
Yeah, emphasizing that state of complete unresponsiveness. He clearly met the competition's criteria for being out, even though he'd removed himself from the immediate vicinity.
And the judge's reaction when they found him like that?
It was, as quoted directly in the source, remarkably blunt, immediate. And it shows them sticking absolutely rigidly to the rules of the game as they saw them. The quote is, of him, he wasn't in the game.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that. This harsh declaration meant his formal disqualification. He was out, he was incapacitated, he wasn't participating with the others anymore, therefore he was removed from the competition. End of story for him.
But it wasn't quite the end of the story for him, was it? This brings us to the consequences for being out.
Right. Which were, according to the sources, pretty harsh. And physically punitive, especially in Marty's case. The source details specific things done to him after he was disqualified.
What did they do?
For Marty, specifically, it involved having one eyebrow shaved off.
Shaved off. Well, he was passed out.
That's what the source describes. A visually jarring, deliberate act.
Okay. And was that it?
No, it didn't stop there. The source also states that Nuts, one of the judges, put F off or whatever and a bunch of words all over the guy's face.
They wrote on his face? With what? A marker?
The source doesn't specify the instrument, just that words were written all over his face while he was incapacitated.
Jeez.
The description is vivid. It paints this striking, almost surreal picture. It made him look, in the source's words, like a modern rap singer, but all over his face and eyebrows.
Like face tattoos, but written on?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
And the source even adds that they documented this. They took old-fashioned photos of him in this state.
They took photos.
Yeah. This whole detail, the shaving, the writing on his face, the photography, it really underscores the bizarre and frankly punitive nature of the consequences for being eliminated in this particular event, as it's described in the source material.
So this entire episode with Marty, him going inside, the judges following, finding him passed out, the instant disqualification with that really blunt phrase, and then these actions taken against him while he's unconscious, it just highlights the unforgiving, almost ritualistic nature of these competition rules.
Absolutely. And the judge's role in enforcing these really severe penalties.
And yeah, like we noted, this is the same Marty mentioned earlier as having a wife and kids back in Finland. A detail from the source that just adds this layer of kind of poignant contrast to what happened to him. It's a stark illustration of the stakes, such as they were, for not being the last one standing in this particular game.
And what's particularly striking, I think, is the level of detail the sources provide just for this specific consequence for Marty. It's described with more specific visual actions than almost any other part of the elimination process we hear about.
That's true.
It suggests it was maybe a significant moment within the narrative of this event for those involved, perhaps a particularly memorable or defining incident, based purely on how the source chooses to recount it.
Okay, so with Marty out in that dramatic fashion and numerous other competitors having presumably reached incapacitation along the way.
Right.
The competition, having significantly narrowed the field through this brutal process of attrition, eventually came down to the final two participants.
The final showdown. According to the source, it was the last remaining Aussie versus Finnish, one from each nationality group that started.
And everyone else was gone.
Pretty much gone by this point, as described, meaning they had reached that state of being unable to stand, walk, talk, or move. Eliminated as per the rules.
And the judges, nuts, and the narrator.
They mentioned drinking constantly themselves throughout the whole event.
Right.
But they state they were not competing in this specific challenge. And they also say they had slowed down their own consumption by the end, presumably focusing more on their judging duties for the final stage.
Okay, so how did it end? The source details the final moments.
It does. It details exactly how the very last elimination occurred, which determined the winner. The remaining Finnish competitor finally reached his absolute limit.
How did they know?
The source describes it with a series of explicit actions that left absolutely no doubt he was incapacitated according to their rules. It says he was pissing himself, vomited, fell over, didn't move after a hosing, didn't move.
Wow. Pissing, vomiting, falling, and unresponsive to the hose.
Yeah. Those actions altogether clearly met the strict, physically based criteria for being incapacitated and therefore out of the running.
So based purely on those actions meeting the criteria.
Purely and strictly on those actions meeting the incapacitation criteria as defined by the rules of this particular competition.
The Aussie participant, the one who was still presumably standing or at least responsive.
Exactly. The one who remained upright and responsive was declared the winner. He was, by the very definition of this specific contest, the last person standing capable of movement or response, according to the sources.
And the sources imply that winning this specific contest, being the one man standing, held some kind of significance.
Yeah, within this particular group it seems so. The sources imply that winning was the primary goal, or at least it was for the one still left at the end, and that being the one man standing out of a man drinking competition mattered.
But only within that group.
Right. In the contained context of these 6 participants and 2 judges who we can assume were friends or at least acquaintances, given the setting was their house.
Good.
The source suggests that being the sole winner likely conferred some specific form of status or maybe a kind of dark respect among these specific individuals. The competitors and judges involved in this unique and extreme event. It wasn't about, a trophy or any external recognition. It was purely about the win itself within the very narrow and intense world they had created for themselves that day.
It really underscores that specific internal dynamic of the competition as it's described, this microculture of challenge where winning was just defined solely and absolutely by outlasting everyone else's physical capacity, pushing boundaries right to the point of collapse.
The winner is simply the one who didn't collapse. That's it.
Okay. Now, you might think the narrative wraps up there. Winner declared, everyone else passed out. Job done.
You might think that.
But here, according to the sources provided, is where the story takes a truly stunning, completely unexpected, and frankly, incredibly dangerous turn.
Yeah, this next part is something else. Immediately after his victory was confirmed, while presumably still heavily intoxicated from the process of winning this brutal drinking competition.
Right. He just won by out-drinking everyone to the point of collapse.
Exactly. In that state, the winner took a shocking and incredibly reckless action. He went out to his car. The sources specify it was parked in the driveway of the house where the event took place.
And the source specifies the type of car.
It does. Notes it had a V8 engine.
Okay, so a powerful car.
A powerful car, yeah. That detail implies it's capable of high performance. And despite his state, described as having just won this extreme endurance contest of alcohol consumption, he started the F-key, meaning he turned the ignition on and started the engine.
Oh.
And then, while clearly in a state described by the sources as having just won a contest requiring others to be totally incapacitated by drink, he proceeded to drive the car.
Drive it where?
The source describes his route. He drove out our driveway, up our street.
Up the street, like the public road.
Yes. And the detail provided about the street adds really important context here. It's described as a dead-end street at the end, but 20 houses.
20 houses, so a residential street. Populated.
A populated residential street, exactly, not some isolated track.
Okay, so he drives up this residential street.
All the way to the end of the street, performed a maneuver described simply as turned around, and then drove all the way up past all our neighbors back into our driveway.
So a complete round trip up and down a street with 20 houses, past neighbors' houses, while in a state described as being the winner of a competition where everyone else was incapacitated by intoxication.
Precisely.
How did the drive end?
The maneuver concluded back where it started, in the driveway, but with a dramatic and highly concerning flourish. The source states he passed out drunk on his steering wheel like with a beep, just collapsed right there after pulling back in.
Passed out on the horn.
That's what like with a beep seems to imply, yeah. And the source explicitly highlights the significant, the undeniable danger of this whole sequence. A highly intoxicated person driving a powerful car, performing maneuvers on a residential street filled with neighbors. It's presented as a direct, immediate consequence of the state he was in right after winning.
That's terrifying. And the sources also include one crucial piece of information amidst all this.
Yes. Thankfully, and this is explicitly reported in the sources, nobody died. Not during the competition itself, nor in this immediate, dangerous aftermath.
Okay, well, that's something.
It is. But this sequence of events, the immediate post-win decision to get into a powerful car, drive it on a residential street while heavily intoxicated, and then pass out at the wheel, it's arguably one of the most striking and definitely the most dangerous detail in the entire narrative provided by these sources. It's just an astonishing capstone to an already extreme event.
And this dangerous drive, reckless as it clearly was, it wasn't without consequence. At least not for the car.
No. According to the sources, it left pretty clear physical evidence.
How so?
Nuts apparently went out to the vehicle after hearing the noise, maybe the horn, and seeing that the winner had passed out upon his return to the driveway.
Right.
And what Nuts discovered upon inspecting the car, as it's described in the sources, served as concrete proof of what the winner had been doing during that brief, dangerous drive.
What did he find?
On the back of the car, specifically described as being on the quarter panels.
The bodywork above the rear wheels.
Exactly. There was black plastic just melted because they're that hot all over.
Melted plastic? From what?
Presumably from extreme friction and heat generated by the tires spinning against the bodywork, or maybe debris kicked up. It wasn't subtle damage. It was clear evidence of something extreme happening.
And there was more.
Yes. Even more tellingly, suggesting the extremity of the driving, the source adds that the tires on the vehicle were basically gone.
Gone, like worn right down.
Worn down to nothing, or close to it, in that very short distance up and down the street.
So what caused that?
The sources directly attribute this physical evidence, both the melted plastic on the car body and the severely worn tires, to a burnout performed by the winner during that drive.
Ah, okay. Spinning the tires intentionally.
That's the strong implication. It's presented in the sources as the direct answer to the narrator's initial question about who did the burnout. The narrative links it conclusively to the winner of the drinking competition, performed immediately following his victory while in that state. This physical evidence, described in the source, lends this strange, tangible credibility to an otherwise almost unbelievable account of a drunken act.
Okay. Wow. So let's try and pull this all together. We've meticulously pieced together this incredible, really intense, often disturbing, and at times almost absurd account entirely from the sources provided.
That's right. Sticking strictly to the material.
We have the specific setup, a private residence in Australia, the extreme and brutal rules, elimination based on total physical incapacitation, the specific participants, 3 Finnish, 3 Australian, Sage as judges, Nuts, and the narrator.
We have the specific criteria for elimination described, including those details around vomiting being okay if you came back, and the hosing method for checking responsiveness.
We have the dramatic and punitive incident involving Marty, his disqualification, the eyebrow shaving, the writing on his face. We know how the final competitor was eliminated. Through physical collapse, pissing, vomiting, falling, not moving.
We know the winner's identity relative to the group, the last standing Aussie. And then his astonishing, incredibly dangerous act afterwards, getting in that powerful V8, driving drunk on a residential street.
Complete with the physical evidence of a burnout reported by the sources. The melted plastic, the ruined tires.
Based only on the material you provided, we can definitively confirm all those points. The number of participants, 6. The exact mix of nationalities, 3 Finnish, 3 Australian. The location, Nuts and narrator's house. The judge's specific role, the core drink till you drop rule, the details on vomiting and hosing, Marty's specific incident and punishment, how the final competitor went out, the winner's identity within the group, and critically, that detailed account of the post-win driving stunt and the burnout evidence.
And it's equally important, sticking strictly to these sources, to state what we don't know or what the sources explicitly don't cover, because that shapes our understanding of the limits of this account, right?
Absolutely crucial. For example, the sources explicitly state they do not provide details about the Finnish participants being from Lapland or experiencing dark months or specific temperatures like negative 32 degrees Celsius.
None of that is in there.
No. They also don't mention the participants' specific ages, like explicitly calling them young. And they don't specifically state that the drink consumed throughout the whole competition was exclusively whiskey. They just describe it broadly as a drinking competition. Could have been anything or a mix.
Okay. And the big one regarding context.
As we noted earlier, and it bears repeating because the sources emphasize it, while this event took place at an Australian residence, the sources deliberately and explicitly limit their description to this single competition. They state clearly they do not provide broader information about Australian drinking culture in general.
They present it as an isolated, specific, maybe even a one-off event.
Exactly. And thankfully, as reported in the sources as a key fact, they do not state that anyone died during this event or its immediate aftermath. This clear focus on the contained narrative, while also highlighting its limitations, is vital for staying strictly within the confines of the story presented in your sources. We can't make assumptions or draw conclusions beyond what is explicitly stated or described.
Right. So, standing back from this remarkable, really contained account, what does this all mean? Why did we deep dive into this specific, isolated, and pretty shocking narrative provided by these sources?
Well, I think this story, as it's presented in the sources, serves as a really stark, incredibly vivid example of individuals pushing human physical limits, pushing them to an extreme, arguably self-destructive degree in this highly competitive, heavily intoxicated environment.
Yeah.
It reveals a very specific, very intense group dynamic among these 6 participants and 2 judges. It's like a microculture they created with its own brutal rules, its own stakes, its own consequences. It really highlights the severe, sometimes bizarre nature of the challenge they devised and actually executed.
It's a narrative that's just packed with moments of extreme endurance alongside these harsh and visually striking consequences for losing or being eliminated, like the stuff with Marty, the shaving, the writing.
And then capped off by that truly reckless, dangerous, almost unbelievable act performed by the winner immediately afterward. All of this detailed within the confines of the provided text and audio, complete with that physical evidence of the post-win stunt described in the sources.
It definitely highlights the sheer danger involved in an event like this, even if the sources thankfully report no fatalities resulted.
And for you, the listener, I think this deep dive isn't just about the shock value of the story itself, though it is shocking. It demonstrates how much specific detail, dramatic narrative, and even tangible proof of an event can be extracted and analyzed from a limited set of sources.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We can paint this really vivid picture of a single, unforgettable event, explore its internal logic, its described consequences, while at the same time being precise and disciplined about the boundaries and limitations of the information presented. We learn a significant amount about this specific event as described in this particular source, but we learn nothing more beyond its self-imposed confines. It's kind of a lesson in extracting maximum information from minimal but very rich material.
Okay. So, we've journeyed through the described setup, the absolutely brutal rules of elimination, the painful process of dropouts, that dramatic and strangely punitive turn with Marty, the final physically defined win, and the shocking, dangerous post-victory drive with its resulting burnout evidence. All meticulously based strictly on the sources you provided us.
It's definitely a contained story, but an incredibly intense one. It illustrates the extremes described within this particular competition and the described behavior in its aftermath. We've really tried to lay out the key facts and the specific, often striking details found within the material you shared.
Well, thank you for bringing these sources for this deep dive. It was quite the account to unpack, truly unlike anything we've explored before on the show, I think.
Indeed, it really was. And it leaves you, the listener, with a perhaps provocative thought, based purely on this source material we've examined. What exactly drives individuals to participate in, and indeed to judge, a competition where the explicit and enforced goal for all but one participant is complete physical incapacitation through intoxication? And furthermore, what is the winner's final, incredibly dangerous act, driving that powerful car on a residential street while in that state, driving it so hard he apparently destroyed the tires? What does that reveal about the mindset described in that moment immediately following this extreme victory?
Something certainly worth considering, based solely on the story told in these sources. Join us next time on The Deep Dive as we explore another stack of fascinating sources you've sent our way.